This is the Surly Grognards for June 24th, 2013. This is Peter Bowman, and as usual, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
It's too hot.
Yeah, it really is. It was in the mid-90s Fahrenheit here in the Boston area today, and we both hated it.
It is made of bad.
That's what happens when you've got two large guys who are of Scandinavian descent dealing with this kind of weather.
For centuries, man has longed to destroy the sun, and now I know why.
So yes, today we're going to be talking about sort of that camp. We're talking about role playing campaigns, with the settings are sort of somewhere between science and fantasy, not just sort of science fantasy, but the weird stuff, the stuff that's sort of hard to describe. That's you can't really encapsulate just in a one sentence summary.
Yeah.
So we're gonna be catching a lot of this stranger stuff that we've seen and we've thought of and contemplated over the years. So we'll be talking about weird stuff, and we'll talk a bit about sort of the differences in the various types of science fantasy. Also, I think we'll touch on that a little bit too, because there's a bunch of different types of science fantasy, and I do want to go over that because I think there are a lot of people sort of get confused by the idea.
Yes.
And are a bit more dismissive of science fantasy than they probably should be.
If you read fantasy and you read science fiction, I don't see why you wouldn't also delve into that weird stuff.
That's not what I'm sort of talking. I'm talking about they're more dismissive of sort of it as it's just science fantasy.
Okay.
That's sort of what I mean, and it's like that's simplifying things. You can have a lot of the same sort of depth you can get in sort of. Honestly, people are dismissive of fantasy too, to a degree that I think is unfair.
True. Well, they're also unfairly dismissive of science fiction.
Yeah, but people are more willing to take the thought that in science fiction you can have sort of more in-depth sort of I'm trying to think of how to phrase it, analysis, and sort of looking at how you can look at how science will impact society and such rolling forward. That's sort of science fiction is often speculative fiction, right? And
yes. That's the we don't want to get any of that ooky pulp stuff on us version of science fiction.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that I think is really awesome. But the thing is that you can have fantasy that's also speculative fiction.
Yes.
Like you can look at what the impacts of magic on a world could be. And so I think that people are a little bit unfairly dismissive of science fantasy, especially because of that. Now, there's science fantasy that doesn't do that, and that a lot of it falls into the category of space opera.
Looking at you, Star Wars.
Looking right at you, Star Wars. I love Star Wars, but it's not speculative fiction.
No. As we've said before on this show, it's entirely a D&D campaign in space.
Yeah.
Right down to the wizards and the laser swords and...
Yeah, it was obviously very heavily inspired by samurai films too, the original Star Wars. But
yep.
And if you've watched enough Kurosawa, you can see the influences in it.
Oh yeah, the fight between Obi-Wan and Vader.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's
a Kurosawa fight.
Yeah, it is, and it's down to the fact they're using kendo as opposed to more Chinese sort of high wire stuff they use in the prequels.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is one of my many pet peeves about the prequels. Because honestly, katana fighting styles make goddamn much more sense with a lightsaber than the more acrobatic stuff they do in the prequels. That's a good way to get yourself lose limbs.
Something I really would wanted to see in the prequels that just completely dispensed to us with was at least in episode 3 once Anakin's fighting styles had a chance to mature, having the economy of movement that Vader evidences later on in the original, in the Holy Trilogy.
Yeah, honestly, that's one of my.
Vader barely moves, but he's in complete control of the fight.
Yeah, that's one of my absolute favorite absolute favorite moments in Empire Strikes Back is at the beginning of the fight when Luke leaps in at Vader, Vader doesn't move until he parries Luke's strike by turning on his lightsaber.
Yes.
Which is one of the most badass moments I have seen in a long. It's subtle, and you're like, "Oh fuck!" That has to be disheartening.
I mean, a lot of that was choreographed in that way because, Stephen Prowse is his name.
David Prowse.
Prowse was in skin-tight leather body glove and could barely fucking move, but
Right, exactly, and and the part of it is because
but it's still really cool.
Yeah, and well, that's the other thing is that like the fight between him and Alec Guinness is slower and sort of based. It's forced to be because, Guinness is an old man. He's not young, and Prowse, as you mentioned, is in the Vader suit,
Tight leather body glove.
but it's still that's my thing I love about the original. We're getting off topic, but
we're totally off topic. What else is new?
But one of the things I absolutely love about I love about the action scenes in the original trilogy is how much more dramatic weight they had than most of the ones in. Not all of them. There are some that actually do have a lot of that sort of same dramatic weight to them. Often in the quieter moments between things, like the bit in Phantom Menace, when after oh, you're still there, Eric?
I'm still there.
Okay.
No, I'm looking at your stream here, and it says offline.
Weird.
We're back.
Okay. Well, anyways, you got a little bit robo there, but
have I?
Nope, you're back normal.
Okay, cool.
At any rate, the bit in the fight, the saber fight at the end with Maul, where Maul and Anakin are separated by the force field, and Maul is just pacing back and forth.
Yeah.
That conveys more about his character than almost anything else they do in the entire movie.
Not that he has a line at all.
He has a couple of lines. Mostly, yes, my master, if I remember correctly. But
I think so, yeah.
Which is a shame, but they actually managed to. There's a lot conveyed in that scene. It's like, okay, that was really well done. Watching it,
yeah, and it completely shows the differences in their philosophy.
Right, exactly.
Everyone's sitting there meditating, trying to maintain, and Maul's pacing back and forth, randomly slapping his lightsaber against things.
Yeah. But yeah, at any rate, back to the actual topic we're covering today. It's hot. Forgive us. We're gonna be extra rambly today, I think.
When we can actually put together whole sentences.
Yeah. So, anyways, there's a lot of really good. I actually, as a great example, actually, of something that falls between science and fantasy that is still speculative fiction. That I want to touch on. I think we talked a bit at. We might either talked about it last week or we talked about it after the show or during one of the RP sessions. But Dune.
Yes.
Dune really does fall sort of in between science and fantasy. It's not hard sci-fi by any stretch of imagination, but oh my god, is it so clearly speculative fiction? Speculative.
Yes, it's. I mean, let's look at Dune from purely a sci-fi perspective. You've got magic voices, you've got giant worms, and a guy that turns into a giant worm that somehow makes him immortal. You've got super drugs that lets you see through time.
Yep.
It's bonkers.
Oh yeah. Force fields that will stop fast-moving objects but not slow-moving objects.
And react with megaton force when encountering focused photons.
Yeah.
Someone shoots a laser at a force field. It causes a multi-megaton blast.
What?
You don't remember that?
No, I do. That's one of those.
Okay.
What? That doesn't make any goddamn sense.
No, but it did.
But it happens. And despite all of this, it is, especially if you read it's really important to read, when you're reading Dune, to read the little intro blurbs, because that's a lot of references back to the back history,
yes.
Which is where you start seeing a lot of what's happened in the universe in terms of the way admittedly bizarre technology, and bizarre history, like
And the weird social customs.
right, but how that has created those weird social customs.
Like the various sects and cults and orders of
Right.
the universe all grew out of the Great AI Rebellion.
Right, the the Butlerian Jihad, where
Yeah.
if you read between lines is the at one point humanity had artificial intelligence and basically it took over, so humanity revolted against it and said never a fucking again.
Yeah.
You may not build a computer that can think like a man. So what do? They create humans who can think like computers,
Yes.
which honestly makes sense in a weird sort of way.
Yeah.
It's just really freaking weird.
They have the whole weird like fate mechanics that the Bene Gesserit get into,
Yep.
where they're trying to manipulate destiny and wackiness with that, and oh, what are they called? I can't remember what they're called. The face changers, the guys who are all about biotech.
Oh God.
They don't show up till later on after Herbert's gone completely off the rails into crazy land, but
Yeah. Ix.
they're referenced much earlier on.
Yeah, Ix.
X, yes.
Which may just be 9, actually. Actually, I think they're called the Ixians, but I think it's just because their planet was numbered 9.
Ah.
Which I think it's another one of the little subtle things that over time it's become X as opposed to 9, which I think is kind of cool.
It is kind of cool.
So yeah, it's there's a lot of weird stuff in Dune, but it's definitely So why are we talking about this in relation to gaming? Is the question.
Because there's no reason you can't do this kind of crazy shit in gaming.
Right, exactly, and that's actually the important bit.
As long as your mechanics and the rules are internally consistent, go nuts.
Right. And you can have a lot of fun creating weird, strange worlds. Like, honestly, admittedly, as much as I love Dune, I don't think that'd be a particularly. I wouldn't particularly want to roleplay in the Dune universe.
No, because it starts getting into much more of the interhouse politics and the weird cult stuff and all the other wackiness.
Like, honestly, like a Dune campaign set before all the bizarreness of the books would be okay, but it would be a very political game.
It's interesting the amount of influence Dune has had over that sort of weird pseudo genre that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, look at 40K. 40K lifts a lot of concepts straight out of Dune, and the Foundation series, and the Borkox Elric saga, and
What you're saying? The Games Workshop steals ideas left and right.
yes. They steal from the best and they typically make them their own.
Yeah, they do. They usually take turns on them, which are interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, there's definitely a lot. Again, the classic thing is basically that going through and when you're running a game and you want to create your own world, you want to do something weird. Honestly, just go through various bits of fiction of various types. Be it TV, be it movies, be it books, be it comic books, what have you, and just start combining ideas and thinking about what that actually would mean.
One of the things, one of the game systems that does this particularly well, it basically takes the Shadowrun. Shadowrun basically goes, okay, we want to make a cyberpunk game, but we want to include magic in it. How does that affect things?
Right.
And does an excellent job of integrating magic and your more traditional cyberpunk things and the influence magic has had over the world at large.
Right. And
both
that's
physically and sociologically.
right. Exactly. I agree completely. That's actually one of the more interesting things about Shadowrun, in my opinion. Honestly, that's actually the most interesting about Shadowrun, in my opinion. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that, and pulling ideas from different. It's not just. It's You see a bunch of stuff where they start doing that idea. Like there are a bunch of sort of published supplements for various games where they sort of start like randomly start pulling ideas, like like Cthulhu Punk, which I've seen. Which is, what if we combine Cyberpunk and Call of Cthulhu? Okay, I guess you could.
There was a little known supplement for a Cyberpunk 2020 where they introduced vampires.
Yeah.
Yeah, hardly it didn't have a very long production run. You can't find it anywhere. I don't even know the name of it. But it was sort of a alternate universe type of deal, and yes, there are vampires. They are real. They're very good at hiding. This is how they work.
Yeah, I remember actually there was an issue of Pyramid Magazine back in the very early days of it. It's a magazine Steve Jackson Games published, sort of a gaming mag that covered a lot of different stuff. Which actually they had that concept. They had a concept of that also in there for GURPS Cyberpunk. I'm willing to bet you that was influenced by that book you're talking about.
Yeah,
that's something you're talking about. And they in fact did have cyber vampires in it. Yes.
If I remember correctly, because vampires sucked with cyberware, because vampires didn't have humanity to lose, because cyberware is built around the idea of integrating into a living body, and vampires aren't alive, they couldn't use it.
Interesting. It was definitely different in
or at least it was in that supplement.
Right.
But not that vampires needed cyberware, they're freaking vampires.
Right.
It just means they're unfashionable.
All right. Let's see what but yeah, any other sort of interesting sort of pastiches fusions you can think of that you've stumbled across?
The whole modern fantasy thing that you see most often in that the best example I can think of off the top of my head is the Dresden Files. So because I friggin' love those books,
right?
Which does a great job of doing the whole secret world thing. The sort of magic never went away; it's just better at hiding itself,
right?
And the ways the two worlds influence one another, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree.
There's one bit where in one book where someone has hidden some data on a flash drive to hide it from wizards, because wizards can't go anywhere near it without cooking the flash drive.
Huh, interesting. Okay, that's cool. Oh, right. Actually, there's one other thing I was thinking of. The whole sort of steampunk thing also.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ignore sort of the overpopularization of it, because it's become overexposed. Like almost anything that becomes popular does. It's just it's what's going to happen. Whatever. But there was some really
a shame, because it is really cool, but it is a little. It's getting near zombie level of overexposure in geek culture.
Yeah, but there's some really cool concepts that aren't strictly steampunk, but are interesting. That are really interesting. I think sort of almost the first sort of existence of it that I know of was there's an RPG that I don't know much about. I've never played, but I've known a little bit about it. That came out in I want to say the late 80s, early 90s, which was called Space 1889. Which was basically introducing like steam power science fiction into the Victorian era.
And that sounds really cool.
Yeah,
you could totally do like Baron Munchausen's more crazy adventures that way.
Yeah, but I think it had sort of a more sort of gritty. It was less sort of weird high fantasy and more actually trying to angle sort of looking at what would happen if that sort of weird sort of steampunk tech type stuff actually worked, and what sort of effects it would have on the world. Similarly, another RPG that I know and read and I would love to have played, but I never got around to playing it, was Castle Falkenstein, which was it was sort of like combining steampunk with, it was sort of like it's sort of like, what if Shadowrun happened in the 1800s? sort of during the Victorian era. So there's magic and fantasy stuff alongside steampunk tech too. And it was
That sounds really cool.
oh, it's fascinating.
It sounds like a big influence for the Iron Kingdoms.
Oh, it's amazing. It's really crazy, and there's a lot of really weird, like a lot of the political influences that happened were very strange. Like you're like, because you're looking at sort of France. Napoleon has built these giant steam cannons around the border to to help defend himself against Otto von Bismarck's immense steam tanks. And because of some of the influences of magic and such, and some weird concepts, like there are now airships that are built. England has a lot of them.
War Zeppelins.
Yeah, except that they're not really Zeppelins. They're held aloft by magnetism and stuff.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I can see that.
They use
totally the kind of crazy like steampunk zaniness I would expect. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know who among the best technicians out there are? Dwarves.
Wizards. Dwarves, yes.
Dwarves. They're more fey dwarves because most of the magic stuff is entirely from the fey. And so like they're elf princes and and dwarves and dwarven nobles and all that stuff who are interacting with the human nobility and such and the human kingdoms and such. It's really, really weird and neat. Also, the other really fun thing about it is it was the general sort of framing device for the actual rule book is based on the designer of the game had basically gotten sucked into that world. And so he's talking about all the background fluff is basically his journal, talking about what's happened and has sort of seeing what's happening.
That's kind of cool.
It's really cool, and basically he actually because he got to know God, I forget who it was, one of the English nobles became friends with, and basically they were hanging out, and he introduced the concept of role playing games to them. So they designed the Castle Falkenstein role-playing game. And so there are a lot of interesting things, little quirks about the way the game works because of the, quote, who created it. Like, you don't use dice because gentlemen don't play dice. So it uses playing cards. And your character sheet is your journal. Literally. You have a little journal and you have to mention where your character keeps it hidden. So other players can't read it unless they actually find it in-game.
Okay.
So other players can't look at your character sheet unless they find your journal, which is kind of neat.
It is kind of neat.
So yeah,
a series of books that actually comes to mind has nothing to do with steampunk, but is very much in the genre we're talking about. Sorry, I totally jumped gears on you.
No, it's fine. It's a good time to do it. Go for it.
Called the Coalfire Trilogy by C.S. Friedman. The premise is this is a couple hundred years after a generational colony ship has landed on this planet. Now, there's some weird influence about this planet where something about the planet tends to manipulate probability, and that something that you might want or fear will happen because the planet assumes that you need this.
Oh, right. I remember you talking about this when we were talking about books. But yeah, go on.
And as such, it will occasionally, this force, which they've called the Fae, will occasionally just conjure actual living constructs for this. So, because humans are such a giant neurological mess compared to everything else on the planet, there are no other sentient beings on this planet, by the way.
Right.
That you end up with all sorts of monsters and demons that run around and feed in various ways on humans, whether it's like a succubus sucking out your vital energies, or just a big gribbly devouring your flesh, or some sort of psychic vampire or what have you.
Right. Interesting.
And it's a couple hundred years after they've figured out how to live and deal with this. And there's a lot of there's a church involved that helps regulate how one interacts with this because people have figured out how to use it almost like magic, except it has a tendency to backfire horribly.
Right.
And because of this force and humans' tendency to doubt in general, they don't have anything more advanced than a simple steam engine. Because if you can't see it working, you can't reassure yourself over and over again that it's working the way it's supposed to, it will fail spectacularly.
Right.
Unless you're an exceptionally confident kind of person.
Right. Okay. I actually just thought of another actual published game that sort of falls in that category. The category we're talking about, Deadlands, of course.
Deadlands, yes.
Where you combine weird tech with westerns with horror.
Yeah, Cthulhuid, Old West Cthulhuid craziness with super science. By the way, we need to play that at some point.
Yeah.
That sounds really up my alley.
I know. I'm still working on a campaign concept, but does any idea of what the players will be doing other than you're in the Weird West, go.
Right.
Because if I do that with the Monday crew, it'll get very it'll be very weird and probably won't work too well. You'll end up going in very different directions.
What? As though we were you were trying to herd cats?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Oh no, it doesn't happen all the time. Let's see, but yeah, this topic came up because of a suggestion by Marco Polaris in the forums. Thank you, Marco. It was a good suggestion. There are a couple of other interesting books that he mentioned in there. Some of which I'm very fond of.
Oh yes.
More specifically, the John Varley's Titan trilogy, which is fantastic. But when you actually write down what it is in text, we're not going to read through it because brain. It's really, you're like, that's all in there, but that's not what the actual book's about. Is the thing. It's again,
I did love reading that, seeing all that batshit insane bunkerosity laid out like that.
And the thing is, all of that in the post he's talking about, the first example, is sci-fi book. It is literally that all happens. All of it. And it's like,
can I at least mention the giant Marilyn Monroe and the camel?
No.
Okay.
Nothing more than you can't say anything more than that. There are limits to there are things I don't want to go over on the
Okay.
on the recording. No. Let's just say the books are freaking weird.
But in a good way.
In a fantastic way. They're wonderfully weird. It's strange. There's a lot of really cool sort of. Again, there's a lot of especially once you get to the third book, you start seeing some interesting sort of speculative fiction stuff in there. Like, what are the actual implications of the way this world works?
Yes.
And you start going, what? Yeah, that
and
actually.
Some of the stuff is purely a result of the deteriorating mental condition of a character.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I love the books, but they're really weird. Let's see. Any other sort of fiction you can think of that sort of fiction or games that you've been involved in that sort of fall into this, Eric?
There was a game. There's a game system. I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist anymore, called Fading Suns, which did tried very hard to do the sort of 1850s, almost the sort of nobility in space kind of deal.
Right.
With like Prussian princes and great houses and sort of think uneloquent.
See, the problem is I don't really know the
Yeah. It's words are hard.
Yeah,
My brain just fell apart. I'm sorry.
It's all right. That's fine.
Back together.
Yeah, but yeah, I've heard about Phasing Suns, and it's sort of a weird sort of science. It's sort of science fantasy again.
Yes, it's very much a science fantasy kind of deal.
And there are a bunch of other ones out there. I mean, the big
Except
thing is that
there's no magic in Fading Suns.
no, there aren't. But it's not magic per se. They probably have psionics
They
and
have
stuff.
Psykers,
Right.
Which are much more subtle than the I cast bio lightning kind of deal.
True.
And you've got the clergymen who, if their faith is high enough, they can influence how things work and actually invoke miracles. But it has lots of downsides if they actually do this.
Right. Cool.
Yes, it's like Dune, but
More spacefaring.
yes, more spacefaring, and it doesn't all center around this one dirt ball of silicate and giant worm monsters. Also, it has 6-limbed cat monster men, which are awesome. And I totally did not play one of those. Nope, not me.
Monstrous Race played by Eric. I'm shocked. Oh God. Yeah. So honestly, there's just a lot of different stuff out. I mean, again, it's what again. If you're looking for stuff like this for a role playing game, though, honestly, don't be afraid to experiment. Is basically my takeaway from all of this. Is look at different ideas, combine them, see, and basically just play around with ideas in your head. Think about how things would happen. I mean, yeah, they might not happen. Things in reality might happen differently the way you think they would, but whatever.
Well, it's part of the fun thought experiment.
Right, exactly. So yeah, basically just pick and choose, experiment with stuff, combine things. And sometimes we talked about a bit about this in the show where we're talking about combining genres, and which I honestly is one of my favorite things to do, just as sort of thought experiments. I don't flesh it out as much as some people I know do when they do have these thought experiments, but combining detective noir with say, I don't know, classic fantasy wouldn't be that exciting, but it'd be interesting. But detective noir, combining sort of detective noir stuff with I don't know.
That was
with
the original script for the Ridley Scott Robin Hood movie, right?
Really?
The original script was all about the Sheriff of Nottingham trying to solve a series of murders using actual medieval forensic techniques. The idea was it was totally a sort of medieval noir film. And they got Ridley Scott on board, and he went, "No, I want to do Robin Hood, real Robin Hood." And
fuck!
Yes, it sounded.
That would have been awesome.
I know.
That would have been amazing. I want that movie.
Ridley Scott decided to piss all over our hopes and dreams,
Fuck you,
and then he made Prometheus to make everything worse.
Fuck you, Ridley Scott. That was awesome. That's a great idea. God, Alan Rickman was so perfect for that too. Ah!
I know.
Oh, damn it. I'm depressed now. I'm really bummed out by that. That would have been so good. Anyways,
I can't cite I can't cite sources off the top of my head.
I know.
I've read this in a couple places, so I think it's relatively. It's a persistent rumor, if not a true one.
Fair enough.
I'm inclined to believe it because Ridley Scott's made a lot of bad decisions post Blade Runner.
Yeah. We can talk about Ridley Scott after the recording's over. Let's see. But basically, just pick and choose and experiment is my, is the long and short of it. And there are we had a bunch of good ideas when we talked about this on the combining genres episode. So yeah, if you want some idea seeds, go check that episode out. We had some fun ones in there, if I remember correctly. I still think the most hilarious sort of weird concept I've heard you or anyone I know come up with sort of that does this. I think actually Chris was the one that came up with this. Was basically combining Scooby-Doo and Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, that was totally a campaign we were going to do, but it never got off the ground.
I think it's one of the most brilliant ideas. This Scooby gang doing a Call of Cthulhu investigation. would be fascinating. I think it'd be a great convention game, honestly.
Yeah, I'm a little sad that never got off the ground because that did sound really cool and fun.
It wouldn't last very long, but it's Call of Cthulhu game, so
It's a Call of Cthulhu game. It's paranoia, but with like drama.
honestly, I do know of Call of Cthulhu games that have lasted long periods of time. Usually, there are characters that end up being rotated in and out because either they're dead or they're say, okay, well, Doctor Smith is unfortunately going to be not going to be available for the next couple of adventures because he's in the insane asylum trying to get his brain back together. So, do you have an alternate character for this? Yep, I do. Which I think is awesome. Honestly, actually, one of the only time I've actually played Call of Cthulhu, we all survived. But actually, the setting the guy a friend of mine who's running it set it basically set it in the 1980s. In a sort of small sort of Massachusetts, like basically Methuen. One of those sort of small sort of outside the suburbs towns in Massachusetts. It was actually really cool. It was a fun little thing.
So what you're saying is my small town. Gotcha.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. One of those small outside of further away from the actual big cities than the suburbs are. Small towns. It was a fun little thing. It was set in the 80s. My character was actually the town sheriff. It was basically all centered. It was all basically all centered around. It was all centered around the high school reunion. So it's like my character is my character. The reunion for my character. So all our player characters were all from the same class. And weird shit happened. All right, so I think that sort of covers the topic for today. I think.
I think so, yeah.
As much as we're going to be able to cover it today with our brains in the state they are due to the
part
weather.
of it is neither of us have a fully loaded programming set at the moment.
It is getting very cloudy outside. I'm happy about this. At any rate, so why don't we move on to the questions? Because we actually
syntax error. Please reinstall Universe. Questions.
When I hear that, all I can think of is the Discworld version, which is out of cheese error reboot Universe. Yes, no. At any rate,
I'm mixing my metaphors.
Well, no, that's what you said is from something else, I believe.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 3 questions actually.
Ooh.
We have multiple today. This first one was from Aaron Good. So he said, I was wondering if you guys hi Peter and Eric. I was wondering if you have any tips or tricks for starting and ending campaigns. By that I mean things like how much information about the campaign world do you give out to players beforehand? Are there any tricks making a group feel like a party fellowship early on in the campaign? Assuming the game survives to a natural conclusion, any tips for wrapping things up in a satisfying manner? How would you deal with an instance where you found out that only have a small number of sessions left before the campaign will be forced to close, i.e. people are moving or what have you? Well, we can touch on these quickly. I mean, how much information about the campaign world do I give out to the players beforehand? That depends. It depends.
It depends largely on how much you have prepared and how much you want to see us add to it.
Exactly, or how much of it how much I want to be a mystery also.
Yes.
In general, I like to write up a couple of pages of background blurb and make it available to the players, so they have something to read through, so they at least have something to grab onto. Like I'll mention major important NPCs if there are ones, or like in a fantasy world, major cities, major bits about religions and such, if that's important. Things about various cultures and so on. I make sure that's available to the players, so they at least have a framework for the world, even if I'm expecting the players to help add to it. I want to give them at least a framework to start with. And if I'm working with a published world, which I don't do very often, basically I'll just say, the books are available. I'll give you a sort of synopsis of what I'm going to use, where we're in, but the books are available. As to tricks for making group really feel like a party slash fellowship early on in the campaign, often, for me at least, my best piece of advice is have the players work together as they're creating their characters, so they at least know what each other's characters are and how they can actually sort of not sort of tie the characters together in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, this is after many years of seeing everything explode in the first two sessions. This is the best way to do it. Absolutely.
Because I honestly, it's when I've done it. I can work around just basically having people sort of give me random characters. In that case, I generally want to have we're not doing sort of group like coming up with concepts and such. At that point, what I insist on doing is at least getting the characters submitted to me at least a week before I start, so at least I can try to think of some way to force the characters to be tied together. So at least they have some sort of notion of reason that they're at least operating together. The best bet is basically putting the characters, start things off in the campaign with characters in at least something resembling a crisis situation where they are forced to work with each other to survive it, and at least that way they are forced to form some sort of ties. The other bit is to make sure that they have that the ongoing goal is something that at least for the beginning of it, at least something that the characters all have in common, and between those two things, they'll be able to work together at least for a little while, and they'll eventually, hopefully, the characters will develop ties between each other as you go along.
The worst thing I ever did for tying a group together was basically, okay, guess what? You guys are all running in terror from this horrible thing.
Yeah,
I was thinking fear of a common enemy would be the best way to keep them together, and I was wrong.
That can work, but you have to know what the characters are like beforehand.
Yes.
But yeah, when I mentioned this sort of a crisis situation, you have to tailor it to the characters in question. So
absolutely.
Otherwise, it won't work. Otherwise, someone might say, "Yeah, well, fuck this, I'm leaving." but oh dear. Additionally, one of the cool things I've stumbled across was there's a old role-playing game, one of the originals, Traveler. When it was recently relaunched, basically a company called Mongoose Games bought the rights to it and republished it. They made a few minor tweaks to the character generation. One of which is that it's much harder to die during character creation, basically almost impossible. I mean, really, really, really. I've not seen it. I've not actually been able to pull it off yet. I've tried, just because it's fun doing that. Traveler character creation is actually sort of a mini game. It's kind of fun. Mini game, that is. But one of the things that they have is that as your character goes along, you basically have these events that you roll on tables, and the interesting thing that they do is that if you want to tie if you want to basically say that when this event happened, tying it to another player. If you do that, you can tie up to 2 of the events in your character's life to other players. And they don't have to. The other player doesn't have to tie like a specific event of theirs back to you on that. It's basically so when this happened, this player was involved. This player's character was involved in some way in this event, as long as it's possible. What happens is. That means that there's a tie between the characters. Also, both of you get an additional skill point, which is kind of awesome.
It is kind of awesome.
So you get actual character design benefits from this. Benefits from tying the characters together in some way, so your characters all have a history together, which means they're more likely to actually operate as a group
be together. Yeah,
which I think is kind of awesome. It's a very clever idea. I really wish that we actually could have pulled off the travel campaign we're sort of rolling up characters for, because my character was hilarious. I ended up basically ended up maxing out my career in the entertainer thing, and I just kept hitting these various things. He was ridiculously famous, had a really high basically ended up having a high social standing just because of effectively he was knighted. And he was, phenomenal musician. All this stuff was quite wealthy, was knighted, all this stuff, and was and I realized that I'd basically rolled up Space Eric Clapton actually. I was aiming for Space David Bowie, but Bowie refused his knighthood, so.
Right, right.
But I was aiming
Space
more.
David Bowie also isn't that much of a stretch.
What, just because of Ziggy Stardust?
Just because of Ziggy Stardust.
Yeah, I know. And because of David Bowie, let's be honest.
Yeah, David Bowie.
As to sort of wrapping up the campaign in a satisfying manner, just have an end game and plan for it, basically.
Yeah, I've only had like 2 or 3 campaigns, and in a satisfying manner. Most of the time, they sort of peter out as people end up dropping out, or the game master just completely runs out of steam, something like that.
Right.
However, when they do end properly, it's usually very memorable.
Right. So you basically have a plan, an in-game plan for how the campaign's going to end. Have a plan for it when you're coming, when that is, if you're reaching it, and try to have sort of a bit of a coda so that the characters can sort of like reflect on what's happened in the campaign and then end things. Assuming the end of the campaign isn't everybody dies in a blaze of glory, which is fine.
Or not blaze of glory in one case.
Yeah, that's a more an accidental end of the campaign usually, though. That's the oh fuck, that's TPK, not campaign is ending. And as to how to deal with an instance where you found out you have a small number of sessions left before the campaign will be forced to close, try to come up with something that can act as an endpoint.
Yes.
Even if it's not the actual endpoint you're aiming for, just try to think of a way that you could wrap up at least some of the major plot threads, give various characters big character moments and such, and go with it. Or and that's basically the best I can think of for that. I mean, just I think that mostly wraps that up, covers that. I think
so. Yeah.
Another question we got, which was from who was this from? We'll check this. I don't have his actual name, but his email name is Assassin Spartan. Okay.
Ninja.
Yeah. He says, my friends and I have been wanting to try to get into role-playing games. A few of us have played in the past, but have just used other people's books. The problem is a lot of us don't have that much money, and we live in different states. I was wondering if there are any free RPGs out there that are good. Okay.
This is your bag again, man.
We actually covered this in an episode, if I remember correctly.
I think we did, actually. Didn't we have, like, gaming on a budget?
We did. Gaming on a budget. Let me get the actual episode number. But we can touch a little bit on some of the basic ideas. There are a couple of very cheap RPGs out there, cheap to free.
eBay is a great source for cheap stuff.
Yes.
Just be careful; it's not too popular. You'll see this price skyrocket.
Yeah, exactly. It was episode 13, actually. RPGs on a budget.
Wow, that was a way back.
Oh, it was a long time ago. But yeah,
that was 2 years ago.
There are a couple of actual free RPGs that do exist. You can do a Google search on them. One that I can think of off the top of my head is Risus, R-I-S-U-S. It's sort of a sillier one, but it's eminently playable, and it's a decent, solid little system. There are a bunch of fairly inexpensive systems that are out there that you can buy the PDFs for, that are inexpensive, like $10, I think, for some of them.
A lot of the previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons you could find online for dirt cheap, because whoever owns Dungeons & Dragons at the time always prints a goddamn ton of them.
Right.
So like 3.5 first, second if you're feeling masochistic.
But yeah, you can find like earlier edition. A lot of times, looking at earlier editions is achievable. Honestly, if you want to play, if you want to play any of the D20 based games, they usually, because of the open game license, there's usually something called an SRD out there on the web. Just look for like D20 SRD or Palladium SRD. No, not Palladium.
We wouldn't do that to you.
Pathfinder SRD is what I think
yes.
And there's usually an SRD for it. That's a system resource document. Is what that stands for. That is their web. Most of the rules will be there. They won't have the They won't actually have like the world stuff in there, but the actual base rules are there. So it's at least a starting point. But yeah, go back and take a listen to the RPGs on a budget episode. It's a while back, episode 13.
I think it was back when I was still drinking myself pretty drunk during these.
Entirely likely. So that's my best advice. But yeah, I hope that helps. And we have one more question from the forums this time. This one is from Dill. What are your thoughts on rerunning campaigns you've run before? He says, I believe the Shadowlands campaign / setting was run before this one, the one that was streamed. How are the versions different?
Well, the Shadowlands campaign ended in the stream. The one on Monday night petered out because, well, Peter ran out of steam.
Yeah, I ran out of steam. Players ran out of steam on the online one.
I was having lots of fun.
Well,
still.
actually, it was primarily a case of that at least one player really didn't like 4th Ed.
Yeah.
And so we basically had to wrap that up there. Yeah, so there's that. I have used campaign worlds multiple times on several occasions. I've used slight tweaks and variations on the campaign world I'm running the Mutants and Masterminds game in. Usually with a different system, which is why this is I've been reworking a bunch of things on the fly. But the basic campaign concept is I've used before. It's a campaign world I've used before. I've changed a few names here and there, and because there are a bunch of villains I used that were official champions villains that I decided not to use this time. I ended up creating other ones and pulled other characters in from other things that I hadn't done before. Experion is a new addition.
Baron von Toten's totally not Dr. Destroyer.
No, he's totally not. He was actually a different villain before. I ended up swapping him into the role Dr. Destroyer filled.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he was a different villain originally.
Okay.
He was more magically based before. And there are differences between him and Destroyer, but you
Well, yes, obviously. For example, Von Toten looks cooler.
Yeah, actually, honestly, thanks to the amazing art by Darkfold. I agree completely. As much as I love Dr. Destroyer, I'm not a fan of his character design. So let's see, any other things you got? Several more.
I really can't see any problems with going back to the same campaign world. Reusing the same campaign, I feel is, I don't know, I probably wouldn't do it, but that's because I've been playing with the same, 10 people for the past 20 years.
Yep. Well,
so they'd all go, dude, I remember when you did this.
There is a campaign idea I have run that I have never gotten past, the 3rd session. I've run it in... I have run the basic campaign concept... let's see, 1, 2, 3... I think 4 times now. And we have never gotten very far into it. It's usually... It's been with some of the same players each time. But the basic concept, I have never gotten past, a few adventures into it. It just ends up petering out. And I've tried it, I think, 4 times now. 3 of the times I've tried it was in 2nd edition. I've tried it once in 3rd. And I'm going to try it again in 4th at some point. But the basic campaign concept is a high... It's designed, it was basically to try out playing in high level stuff that basically none of us really got around to doing much of in 2nd edition or in 3rd edition. Where basically the concept is basically the player characters are all a group of well-known heroes who basically went their separate ways and are being brought back together by an old friend to save the world one last time. From a big giant world-eating demon that has basically been traveling between various worlds and devouring them and moving on to a new world to eat the next one.
And now we're gonna face punch him.
And now and he's coming to this world. So basically, it's basically a fantasy. It's basically a fantasy game running into effectively thinking about it now. This didn't occur to me at the time, but it's fantasy running into Galactus.
Yes.
This just occurred to me. And I want to get we joke that the demon is now 4-0 versus the players. And I'm gonna try it again using 4th edition as a base for it at some point. Try an epic level play basically.
Cool.
Don't know if and when I'll get around to doing it, but I want to try it at some point. But yeah, players. But I like the framing conceit for it. For the very simple reason that comes with a baked-in reason why the players are going to work together. It's not just like they have to save the world. It's because they used to work together. So the characters all know each other.
Wow, that's kind of a great excuse to bring Tarek back.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
Honestly, if I wanted to do it online, one way I could do it is I could run it, use and basically say bring whatever character you want to bring that you've played in 4th Ed, because it's basically someone is basically pulling together heroes from a bunch of different worlds together to fight the big demon.
I just like the idea of everyone bring the online crew bring their Shadowlands character, and I bring mine, and it's like, yeah, oh yeah, Tarek's conquered the entire Northern Territories with his barbarian.
Wait, that's the thing is Tarek fits in there because he's in the same game world.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I've actually run. The amusing thing. Actually, Eric, I didn't tell you guys this, and I didn't tell the players of the other camp. I was running 2 campaigns set in the same game world when I was running with you guys and with with another group of my friends. I was running that one online. This wasn't. I wasn't streaming it at the time. This is before I actually started streaming anything. But I actually had there was a scene where I believe I did both ways, and you guys didn't. Neither group noticed it. Do you remember there was a scene where you actually ran into another group of adventurers?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was the other party, and I had the same thing happen from the other side.
Awesome.
This wasn't the Shadowlands crew. It was a different group, but yeah. So the 2 parties sort of cross paths.
That's kind of funny.
I basically did that just because I thought it was funny, and it's like, in theory, I could do a crossover. I'm not going to ever, but I could. But yes, I could. But yes, Tarek could show up in if I was to do a Shadowlands reboot in that sort of way, Tarek could show up and be there and kick ass.
I liked Tarek. He was lots of fun.
Tarek was lots of fun. Tarek was a good
Tarek
character.
was the simplest character I've ever played. And I had lots of fun with that.
Yeah. The one interesting thing is that Tarek would be very interesting to see play off of the Shadowlands crew, because Tarek is not a bad guy, but he's definitely morally challenged in some ways.
He's very morally challenged. Well, it's more that he has an entirely different moral value set than most everyone else, because he grew up with traditional orcs.
Tarek was Eric's barbarian character in the 4th D&D game that I ran with the Monday Night crew, which is set in the same game world as Shadowlands. All right, but to finish off Dill's question, because there's a little bit more to it. It's some more specific questions. The second incarnation of setting turn out to be better or just different? Did the second incarnation of setting turn out to be better or just different? Did you build things from a previous version or come up with new things? In that bit, I wouldn't say it's been better per se. Sometimes it is better just because I've had more time to refine things, but usually it's just I've made some different changes just so I keep things fresh for myself. Do you keep all the same plot points? No, I usually change those up. Change the base of the characters damn straight, only to change up minor plots or even major ones. The basic overarching plot was very similar between the 2 campaigns, but there were differences. Basically the primordial cult existed. I didn't come up with the concept of the main villain from Shadowlands. I hadn't come up with that character at the time for the Monday Night crew. They had different sets of villains, but there were a bunch of the NPCs were the same.
Yeah, like the Drow Noble.
Yep, Lady Pridwin. Yep.
Yes.
She was in both campaigns. You guys got along with her better than some of the people in the Shadowlands group. You guys,
like I said, we were morally challenged.
Honestly, she was probably more morally correct than Tarek was.
Yeah. Will's Dragonborn and my barbarian nearly coming over to blows over the concept of slavery.
Yep. There was that. Yeah. Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
as far as Tarek was concerned, of course you could have slaves. I mean, their children aren't slaves. That's dumb. You can't sell them. It's people you've captured on a raid. They're yours now. That's how it works. Duh.
Yeah. So I think that will. And there are a couple other bitsy questions there, but we're running out of time, and I don't really go into that. But basically, asking how does having a new group going through the same general motions change the DMing? It changes it. But it's hard to explain. And we'll have another group in the same world at the same time, affecting things just in different places. Oh God, that's a different question, and that's something that we'll talk about another time. That is actually something that's actually I do want to cover on maybe even give an episode to talking about simultaneous campaigns, because it's an interesting concept that deserves more time than we can give it tonight.
That's an episode unto itself, really.
Yep. So I think we'll cover that another time. Anyways, guys, I think that will wrap things up, unless you got some last thoughts on the weird and the wild.
I have yet to be in a campaign with Nazis riding dinosaurs. I think this needs to be rectified at some point.
Got it. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope everybody had a good time and enjoyed the episode, found it useful in some way, or at least funny, or entertaining. If you've got questions you'd like answered on the show, if you've got feedback for us, show topic suggestions, criticisms, or what have you, please do send them to us. We have an email address. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com, or you can post them to us on the forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com. You can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @mechagm. You can also find me on Facebook and Google+. I'm Peter Bowman in both places. We'll be back next week, I think, probably to the same time, but I'll
find out.
I will try to let people know on Twitter, on the Twitters, when I have more information. We may be switching to Mondays for a while at least. We'll see. When we have more info, we'll share it, though. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week, either Monday or Tuesday. We'll let you know. Other than that, guys, keep on gaming and have fun. Say goodnight, Eric.
Good night, Eric.
Bye, everybody.